My lifelong best friend leaked our private conversation to my boss and got me fired. So, I went nuclear on her. I took her job, her relationship, and her home. My lifelong best friend and I worked at the same company, and for over a year, we were competing for the same promotion. I thought it was friendly, but she literally ruined my life over it. When I got the promotion, she didn't congratulate me or tell me she was happy for me. Instead, she leaked our deeply private conversation. In this conversation, I vented to her about my current boss and joked about sleeping with the CEO for the promotion. I know this was crude, but it was to my best friend when I was tipsy, and she knew I was not serious. Well, it wasn't long until I got called into my boss's office and fired. What's even worse is that when I came home, I found my boyfriend with his things packed. I asked him what this was about, and he showed me the conversation. You see, I also vented about him, specifically about how sick I was of his mother controlling our life. He told me that his mother comes first, and if I don't respect that, I'm not the one he left me that day. And then came the final blow. An edited version of that conversation where I talked Badland House about my friends was posted on social media. I tried to tell my friends that it was fake, but nobody believed me. I was left totally alone. And that was the day I decided I would ruin my ex-best friend's life. I wasn't some criminal mastermind. However, I really didn't know where to start. I sat for hours, lied awake some nights thinking about how to get my revenge. And yet I couldn't think of anything. However, one night, I decided to just start taking action.
Just start doing something.
I knew everything about Sophie, and I would somehow use all of it against her. That's when everything finally clicked. I knew exactly what to do. First, I went after her darkest secret. The fact that Sophie had been involved with a married man for years. She had always sworn me to secrecy about it, and I kept my word. I never thought it was okay, and would always tell her to find her own man. But that was always a sensitive subject whenever we spoke. So, I respected her wishes until she came to me asking for relationship advice. One night, she said her and the guy had a date planned, and the wife thought he was on a business trip. When the time was getting close to the date they planned at the restaurant, he stopped responding to her. She asked me what she should do, and I told her to dump him because there were plenty of men without wives or kids that she could date. But she didn't want to hear that. She had his location through an app and saw that he was out of town at the moment, even though it was only an hour before their reservation. She showed me the text messages between them, and he said he was so excited to see her again. He also talked about how much he missed her. She was completely ready in a beautiful gown, and her hair was curled, and Sophie rarely ever touched her hair. Sophie also never was much of a makeup person until Drew, her affair partner, expressed how much he loved women who wore a certain type of makeup. And lo and behold, Sophie was wearing makeup that night. She ended up calling him, and he claimed that he would have to rain check for the evening because he had a flat tire. I told her it was a sign just to leave the guy alone, but Sophie was adamant. She checked his location and said she was going to drive to him. His location was an hour and 45 minutes away, and he said he was at a nightclub. She asked me to come with her, and I told her I didn't want to involve myself in that. She said that a true best friend would go with her to make sure she was safe. I reluctantly agreed. 2 hours later, we pulled up to the nightclub, and we saw Drew's car. There was a long line to get into the club, and we knew we'd be standing there all night to see Drew. Sophie flirted with the security guard, and he let us cut the line. She pushed through the crowd until she found Drew. When she found him, he was in a section with multiple women and a few other guys. She watched in horror as one of the women proceeded to kiss him and sit in his lap. She ran up to him and asked how he could do this to her after everything they'd been through. Drew and Sophie had been seeing each other for about 2 years now, and he even hinted over text messages that he would leave his wife for her as soon as he was financially stable enough to afford their mortgage by himself. And she fell for it time and time again. Drew looked shocked when he saw Sophie standing in front of him and tried to explain. Sophie told me to wait for her in the car, and that's exactly what I did. When she came out, she told me it was a misunderstanding and said that they were on good terms again, questioned her about that relationship or cared much about it after that night. Until now, I went through old text messages, photos, and anything that could prove the affair. I don't know why I never exposed her previously, but I wish I had. Once I had enough, I anonymously sent it all to the man's wife. The explosion that followed was bigger than I expected. The wife didn't just confront her husband, she made it public. She posted everything online and dragged Sophie's name through the mud. Our entire friend group saw it. People who had once admired Sophie turned their backs on her. She was humiliated. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to satisfaction. But I wasn't done. Next, I set my sights on her career. Sophie worked at a marketing firm. You know, the same one I had. Reputation was everything in her line of work, and I knew exactly how to tarnish it. I created a fake social media account in her name. I bought followers to make her look legit. I then posted some of the pictures she had on her profile to the fake account and bought likes to look further less suspicious. After having the account for a week, I started posting offensive and controversial comments all over social media. Nothing too extreme at first, just enough to raise eyebrows. Then I ramped it up. The posts started attracting attention, and soon people were reporting the account at the same time. I sent an anonymous letter to her HR department pretending to be a concerned coworker. After destroying Sophie's reputation and personal life, I felt a fleeting sense of satisfaction. But as the days went by, I realized something was still missing. Despite her complete ruin, my life hadn't returned to normal either. I was still unemployed, friendless, and heartbroken. The truth was, even with all my revenge, Sophie had left me empty. I knew I needed to move on, but something was holding me back. I started to wonder if she knew everything had come for me. Could she suspect? The idea that Sophie might be sitting at home, alone and defeated, questioning who had destroyed her, kept me restless.
What if she was planning something?
I couldn't just leave her like that, without being sure she was completely crushed. The fear that she might rise again and somehow strike back at me began to consume me. I needed more. I needed a final blow. So I decided to watch her closely. Using anonymous social media profiles, I kept track of her moves. She had gone quiet, which gave me a strange sense of power, but also growing anxiety. Then one night, I received a notification, a post from a mutual acquaintance mentioning Sophie. I quickly checked, and there she was, smiling. She was at a dinner, elegantly dressed, with friends I didn't recognize. How was that possible? I knew something was wrong. That smile didn't look like someone who had just lost everything. It was forced fake. I looked closer, analyzing every detail of the photo. Those weren't her usual friends. These were new people. Sophie, apparently, was trying to start over. A thought began to form in my mind. She was trying to rebuild her life, and I had to act before she could. That same night, I made a decision. I had to make sure Sophie wouldn't get another chance to rise. But unlike my previous actions, this time I wanted something more personal. I needed to confront Sophie face to face. So, I created a plan to get close to her in a way she'd never expect. I started going to the same places where I knew she might be. Soon, I managed to infiltrate a social event she was attending. At first, I kept my distance, watching from afar, but I gradually got closer. At one of these events, I stumbled upon something unexpected. Sophie was talking to a man. Not Drew, her former married lover. This one was different. Tall, charming, clearly influential. They were laughing and chatting as if something new was beginning. It enraged me. It wasn't fair. I had lost everything because of her, and now she was there, moving on, without even feeling the weight of what she had done. I decided it was time to introduce myself. I went to the bar, ordered a drink, and casually approached them. Sophie didn't recognize me at first, which gave me an advantage. She was clearly charmed by the new guy and wasn't paying much attention to me. The opportunity was right there, and I knew exactly what to do. "You work at the marketing firm, right?" I asked her, pretending to be a stranger interested in her career. Sophie looked at me, surprised, but quickly composed herself. "Yes," she answered with a smile, unaware of who I was. "Do you work in marketing too?" I nodded, smiling back. "Actually, I used to work at the same firm until a few months ago."
Pause.
"Before you sabotaged my life." Her smile vanished instantly, and I could see the panic starting to form in her eyes. She finally recognized me. The man beside her, confused, looked at the two of us, not understanding the sudden tension. "Sophie, why don't you introduce your new friend?" he asked, trying to ease the mood. But I ignored him completely, focusing only on her. This was the moment I had been waiting for. "You really thought you'd get away with it?" I continued, keeping my voice low enough so only she could hear. "I took everything from you once, and I can do it again. Don't think this new life of yours is going to last." She tried to keep her composure, but I could see the fear growing in her eyes. She didn't know what to do, what to say. I slowly backed away, leaving that threat hanging in the air like a storm cloud. In the following days, I noticed that Sophie stopped appearing at events. She was hiding, as if she knew I was around, waiting for the right moment to strike again. That gave me a sense of control. I had won again, but I still wasn't satisfied. Sophie might be trying to escape, but I had more cards to play. I decided to investigate the man she was with. It didn't take long to find out who he was. A high-profile executive with a spotless reputation.
Perfect.
I knew any scandal could ruin his career, and that, by association, would destroy any chance Sophie had of moving forward with him. I started digging through his social media, looking for any sign of weakness. And then I finally found it. A small detail, but enough. An old photo that linked the man to a financial controversy. It would be enough to shake his reputation. I began working, sending anonymous tips to local journalists, suggesting they investigate his past. It was like lighting a spark in dry grass. Within days, the story began to gain traction. The man Sophie was getting close to started facing problems at work, and by extension, she was affected too. Her new friends quickly distanced themselves, and once again, Sophie found herself alone. I had done it. Once again, I had destroyed her life, and now she knew that no matter where she went or who she was with, I would always be there, ready to pull the rug from under her feet. Weeks after Sophie had disappeared from the radar again, I thought everything was finally in place. The man she had been involved with was exposed, his career ruined, and her new friends had abandoned her. I felt at peace, as if I had finally closed the cycle. But fate still had one more surprise in store. One morning, while I was having my coffee and browsing the internet, a news article caught my eye. The headline mentioned Sophie's name, and my eyes quickly widened. Woman involved in financial scandal arrested under investigation for money laundering. My curiosity was immediately piqued. I clicked on the article and started reading. Sophie had been arrested after a large sum of money, from suspicious sources, was transferred into her bank account. And the origin of that money? The man she had started dating. He had transferred funds into her account, and those funds were being tracked as part of a criminal operation. She claimed ignorance, but the evidence was there, and the authorities wasted no time surrounding her. Sophie was arrested and taken in for questioning. After weeks of investigation, she managed to post a high bail and was released from jail, but by then, her life was in shambles in a way I could never have predicted. Despite her release, Sophie could no longer find work. Her criminal record was tarnished, and no company wanted to be associated with someone who had been investigated for financial crimes, even though she hadn't been formally convicted. She tried for months to rebuild herself, but every door was closed to her. Meanwhile, my life was heading in a completely different direction. After everything that had happened, I decided I needed a fresh start too. I used my savings and invested in a small business. At first, it wasn't easy, but with hard work and dedication, my venture began to grow. Little by little, I built a solid reputation, and the business expanded faster than I could have imagined. Time passed, and my company became a reference in the industry. I felt fulfilled, and everything seemed to have found its balance at last. Then, on a regular workday, something unexpected happened. One of my assistants came into the room and said there was a candidate waiting for a job interview. I didn't usually handle interviews personally, but that day, for some reason, I felt I should. When I entered the interview room, I couldn't believe my eyes. There she was.
Sophie.
More worn out than I had ever imagined I would see her, with deep dark circles under her eyes, dull hair, and visibly old clothes. She looked at me, not recognizing me, only with the expression of someone who desperately needed a chance. I sat in the chair across from her, watching her every move as she tried to maintain her composure. Finally, she began to speak, her voice trembling. "I'm here because I'm looking for a job. I know my history isn't the best, but I'm willing to do anything.
Any job.
I just need a chance." I watched her for a moment, the irony of the situation almost making me smile. She had no idea that she was sitting in front of the person whose life she had destroyed years ago. I took a deep breath and leaned forward slightly, a cold smile forming on my lips. "I'm sorry to inform you, but we don't have any positions for idiots," I said slowly, savoring every word. The shock on her face was immediate, but before she could react, I continued. "However, if you're interested, there is something you could do." She blinked, confused, still trying to figure out what she had walked into. "You can work here cleaning my personal toilet," I finished, each word dripping with contempt. Sophie was silent, the realization finally dawning on her. She stood up, clearly humiliated, and for a moment, I thought she might try to argue, but she said nothing. Instead, she turned and walked out of the room as quickly as she had entered. As the door closed behind her, a wave of satisfaction washed over me. Not only had I won, but now she knew it. And the sweetest part of it all? She had come to me, begging for a scrap, without even knowing that I was the person she had betrayed years ago. I watched her through the window as she left the building, and for the first time in a long while, I felt that the cycle was truly complete. Do you think I was too harsh?